Welcome, fellow culinary adventurers, to my very first video on Fictional Feasts. I'm thrilled to present to you today the Chaliapin Steak Don from Food Wars. Want to see how we created this beauty? Follow me. The Chaliapin Steak Don is a rice bowl topped with steak that's been tenderized with onions. For this you will need 5 medium-sized onions, a bit of green onion, 5 large tablespoons of butter, salt, freshly ground black pepper, turmeric, and optionally, if you want to make a delicious steak sauce to accompany your dish, you can do so with some soy sauce, red wine, and potato starch. For the steak I'm using a half-inch Irish grass-fed top loin steak, also known as New York strip steak. It's best to use a steak that's slightly tougher in texture and more packed with flavor. The cooking equipment used in this dish are, first of all, obviously a cutting board and a knife. In addition, you will also need a rice cooker, preferably, a box grater, a plastic container, a large skillet, some mixing bowls, and a final bowl for plate up. Now that the formalities are out of the way, let's start cooking. First of all, take 3 of your onions, peel and halve them so that they're ready for grating. Next up, take your grater of choice, placed in your plastic container, and go ham on the halved onions. Grating onions for this purpose is better than mincing them, since this will release more juices which will help the tenderization of the steak. Set your onions aside and get your steak out on the cutting board. We will now score the steak so that it will be easier for the grated onion juices to get into the steak. Do this by taking a sharp knife and making some gentle, shallow cuts on the steak in a cross pattern. Turn the steak around and do the same. If the cuts aren't consistent enough for your liking, just shallow cut the steak again. Once the steak is scored, you can get your plastic container back out again. With a spoon, take out half the grated onions and set aside in a small separate bowl. Now prepare a bed for your steak with the remaining grated onions in the container by pushing down the onions and making an even surface. Place your steak onto the onion bed and cover with the remainder of the grated onions. Next up, you need to cover every nook and cranny of that steak with the onions so that it's fully covered. Now, set your container in the fridge for at least an hour and up to 4 hours depending on the thickness of your steak. Next up at our list is the rice. I used 2 cups of koshi curry rice, but you can use any short grain rice you'd like. Make sure to at least double, preferably triple wash your rice to make sure the water isn't murky and that the rice will turn out perfect. For this dish, I really recommend using a rice cooker, so turn it on and start making the rice. If you don't have a rice cooker, you can always just make the rice in a small pot. Whilst we're waiting for our rice to cook, we need to get started on the rest of the onions. Peel the onions, take out your knife, and dice the onions as shown. Set your diced onions aside in a bowl. Place your green onions on the cutting board, slice as much as you need, and set aside. Next up is the umeboshi, a crucial ingredient in this dish that provides acidity to balance out the fat from the steak and butter. Take out your umeboshi, which you can buy at most Asian grocery stores, take it between your fingers and squeeze out the pit. I use 2 umeboshi per cup of rice, but you can attune this to your own taste. Once all the umeboshi are deseeded, take out your knife and make a paste by mincing the deseeded plums. When the paste is ready, set it aside in a bowl. After at least an hour has passed, you can take out your container from the fridge and remove the steak. You can now see that the steak has turned slightly grey, but don't worry, this is completely normal in the tenderization process. Now it's very important to remove all of the onion on the steak. You can do this at first with your hand or a knife, but for the remaining bits, I really recommend a paper towel. Once the steak is onion free, you will need to start seasoning the steak with 1 tablespoon of salt and 1 tablespoon of coarse, freshly ground pepper. Now, with your knuckles make sure to really press in all of the seasoning into the steak and preferably set the steak aside for at least 40 minutes. While the steak is seasoning, heat a large skillet over medium-high heat and add neutral cooking oil. Sauté the onions with salt until they become translucent. Pushing the onions to one side and adding 1 tablespoon of butter. I accidentally used 2 here, which resulted in a butter shortage for the sauce. Once the butter melts, add a tablespoon of turmeric for that anime-inspired vibrant yellow color without overpowering the flavor. Alternatively, you can caramelize the onions for a browner look, following the anime's recipe more closely but for a slightly sadder look. As the turmeric and butter completely melt together, you can now stir in the onions. Wow, this looks really close to the anime now. Now that the onions are done, you can optionally strain them with a sieve and set them aside in another bowl. Next, Clean the same pan used for the onions and set it over a high heat to prepare for the steak. Be cautious about any water droplets in the pan with hot oil, since this can cause splattering. For a half-inch medium doneness steak, sear each side for about 1 minute. Although it won't achieve a perfect crust within this time, it still turn out delicious. After flipping, add 1 tablespoon of butter to baste the steak for the remaining minute. Remember to adjust the amount of butter to avoid any shortage for the pan sauce, which I clearly didn't do again, resulting in no leftover butter for the sauce. Once the steak reaches your preferred doneness, set it aside for at least 5 minutes to rest. After 5 minutes, slice your steak against the grain and set aside for the plate up. Your rice should be ready now and ready for plate up. Put the rice from your rice cooker or pan into your serving bowl. Fluff it up a bit with a spatula and fill the bowl for 3/4. Now, take your umeboshi paste and mix it well in your rice bowl. Take out your prepared steak and put it over the rice horizontally. Now, take all of the turmeric yellow onions you have and place a mountain of onions over your steak. Last but not least, sprinkle the top with your green onions for a vibrant spark in the dish, and voila! Your Chaliapin Steak Don is done. I think it turned out really great and it's very similar to the anime, looks wise at least. I sadly couldn't make the pan sauce that would have elevated the dish even more. There's only one thing left to do. Let's dig in. Wow, it's so delicious. All the flavors work together really well. I find this a definitive success. If you liked this video, please make sure to subscribe and hit that like button for more. See you later.